Among all the Marvel projects that we've gotten in 2022, Moon Knight stands out. The character's dynamics with multiple identities set him apart from the more straightforward heroes, and Oscar Isaac was simply brilliant in the role. Now we've learned some new details about Moon Knight's costumes, so in this video we'll go behind the scenes with the costuming of the show and its eccentric protagonist. Let's begin by exploring the faces of Moon Knight. Fans of the Moon Knight comics will know that the character has two very distinctive looks when he's in costume. For Warren Ellis's run on the character, he and artist Declan Shalvey figured that Moon Knight should have different looks for his different personalities. They created the outfit that we like to call the Mr. Knight look, for when the Fist of Khonshu isn't quite ready to unleash his fist yet. While the hero still wears his hood, he pairs it with an all-white three-piece suit, complete with a white pocket square. A charming outfit like this does help you deal with the guy's fearsome reputation, but only just. His other outfit is a more traditional superhero suit. He rocks an all-white suit of armor with a hood that covers his hooded face. The suit comes with a cape, so you know he's a superhero, as well as a sash tied around his waist. We think there's a possibility that the costume designers borrowed that element from Ms. Marvel's design in the comics, where her red sash is a distinctive part of her outfit. The fact that Moon Knight has two different looks has a practical advantage to the team behind the show as well. While Oscar Isaac does a great job of differentiating between the two personas of the character, Marc Spector and Stephen Grant, it gets a lot harder to do when his face and body are covered up, not to mention the sneaky fact that a CG model of Moon Knight takes Isaac's place on the screen many times. It only makes sense that they use the two different costumes to show which personality is in control at any time. When Moon Knight is rocking the Mr. Knight look, it usually means Stephen Grant is in charge, whereas Marc Spector is the one who gets to business in the full suit of armor. Interestingly, the looks and personas were switched around at first. Oscar Isaac appeared on the Disney Plus original show Marvel Assembled to talk about his experiences shooting Moon Knight. While talking about the costume designs, he gave an interesting piece of info that we didn't know. The costumes were originally switched. It was Marc Spector who would don the Mr. Knight dinner party attire, while Stephen Grant would sport the after-party suit of ancient armor. But as the writers developed the characters of Grant and Spector, they figured that it made more sense for the suits to go the other way around. This switch-up must have come about due to the differences between the Moon Knight of the show and the Moon Knight of the comics. In the comics, Marc Spector is the original owner of his body, sharing it with three other personalities. One of the personalities was Mr. Knight himself. For the show, they've condensed it down to two personalities, probably to make the character a little more approachable for first-timers. Along with that, Stephen Grant himself is way different in the comics. Grant is the more business-minded personality of the character, managing the money Moon Knight brings in to further finance his quest to bring justice to the travelers of the night. He probably also does Moon Knight's taxes. The writer of the show took a very different approach to this persona, writing him as a silly goof who happens to know a lot about ancient Egypt and is tormented by the things Marc Spector does when he's asleep. We have to say that the costumes are definitely matched up to the right personalities. Mr. Knight does kind of look like a super intimidating and super dashing museum director, while the suit of armor pairs well with Spector's tendency to violence. But how do you maintain a fancy suit for a hero? We learned a little bit more about the Mr. Knight three-piece suit as well, this time from the show's costume designer, Megan Kasperlik. While Moon Knight's battle armor is made of mostly CG, the Mr. Knight fit is actually a real suit that Oscar Isaac would wear. Bespoke tailors produce perfectly fitting suits for Isaac. How many, you ask? Well, not that many, just around 50 of them. If you've ever found yourself taking extra care while eating when wearing white clothes, you can imagine what a nightmare it would be to wear an all-white suit and then go and fight an ancient Egyptian conspiracy with it. Some of the scenes were shot in rain-slick streets, so naturally, every time something touches the ground, it was either an extra job for the VFX team to remove the stain or time to replace the suit. These are the complications of being a superhero that we never get to see in comics, movies, or shows, but someone somewhere has to deal with them. When will you get to see more of Moon Knight and his dope attire? That's very much up in the air for now. Oscar Isaac once referred to the show as a mini-series, but the ending sure seems to be set up for a second season or some kind of continuation. Showrunner Jeremy Slater has also stated that he has ambitions for the show's future, but it all comes down to Kevin Feige. Our bet would be that the Fist of Khonshu will be back, but maybe not for a year or two. In the meantime, we're reaching out to Megan Kasperlik to get the contact of Mr. Knight's tailor. Now, for some other news. First off, casting a Marvel show is tough stuff. The Marvel Cinematic Universe has featured a who's who of A-list actors across all of its projects. They've even scored Christian Bale for Thor: Love and Thunder. That's a big get. set, but casting Moon Knight was a uniquely challenging task, says showrunner Jeremy Slater, because of the multiple personalities. The list of actors who've done this is pretty short. Edward Norton already had a brief stay in the MCU, while Brad Pitt hasn't been convinced to join yet. Tatiana Maslany played like a dozen different versions of the same character in Orphan Black, but Moon Knight's a guy and she's cast somewhere else. Oscar Isaac had never played a character like this before, but he'd starred in Disney's new Star Wars movies, and that allowed him to make a name for himself. When the writers' room found out that Isaac had agreed to play the role, they were apparently very relieved. Their faith in his abilities was well justified, as Isaac had one of the most technically challenging acting roles in the MCU, and he knocked it out of the park. But even Oscar Isaac can't get everything he wants. In his last 2 episodes, Moon Knight explores a lot of the mysteries that shroud the 2 men that live in one body. It was a very emotional pair of episodes that, for many viewers, were the highlights of the entire season. But one scene was left out of the finale, much to Oscar Isaac's dismay. Marc Spector has very close ties to Khonshu, obviously, but as portrayed on the show, it sort of comes out of nowhere in a desperate moment in his life. It turns out that there was originally a scene in the final episode that connected Spector's mom to Amit, the antagonist of sorts of the show. The whole thing was apparently very subtextual and didn't have much of an impact on the plot, but it was meant to solidify how the Egyptian pantheon ties everything together in this corner of the Marvel universe. We kinda like the way Marc Spector's backstory was handled in the show, but why don't y'all tell us in the comment section below what you think about this cut scene? Would the show be better off without it, or do you agree with it being cut? On a side note, did you know that Moon Knight brings Mara Gannet to the world? A key element of a show like Moon Knight was finding the right way to portray Egypt and its culture. It was following in the footsteps of Shang-Chi with its gorgeous exploration of Chinese folklore, and it was preparing the world for Ms. Marvel's take on Pakistani and Desi culture. Director Mohammed Diab decided that Mara Gannet, an Egyptian genre of rap music, was something worth introducing to the MCU fanbase. The word Mara Gannet means festival in Arabic, and it originated with DJing shenanigans at Egyptian weddings and block parties. But while the Arab Spring Revolution was toppling the Hosni Mubarak regime, Mara Gannet became the anthem of the protesters, a fierce expression of the people's rage. That background, combined with Mara Gannet's new role as a way for the people to vent their frustrations, have made it a target of severe censorship by the current regime. But Diab felt that Mara Gannet showcased who the Egyptian people are better than any other form of music, and that's why he thought it was important to feature it in Moon Knight. We think that's pretty cool, and the songs are total bangers too. That's it for our MCU coverage today. Did you enjoy Moon Knight as much as we did? How excited are you for Season 2? And when do you think that Moon Knight will join the Avengers? That last one is a bit of a long shot, but let us know what you think in the comments below. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.